Welcome to today's installment of Mentorship Mike. We have Brigham Taylor with us today. Brigham, welcome.
Good to be here.
Good to have you. Now, Brigham, I've got just a very short bio for you, but I don't think I can do justice what you've done. Just all the productions you've been involved in, franchises that people will know, very involved with Disney and some of those great franchises over the last, I would say 2, maybe even 3 decades. I hate to say 3 decades, but maybe it's 20 to 20.
Well, it has been 3 decades. That's
Okay.
more accurate. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe bring us through some of the things that people would know that you have done.
Yeah. On the kind of action adventure side, I was involved with the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, the Chronicles of Narnia franchise, movies like Oz the Great and Powerful, Tron Legacy, John Carter of Mars, Tomorrowland, stuff like that. Also, we back when it was more commercially viable, worked on a lot of fun, inspirational dramas, sports dramas mostly, like The Rookie and Remember the Titans and Miracle and Secretariat, and those were fun things. So yeah, overall, probably about 40 plus film productions over my time at Disney Live Action.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, I think everyone, especially my age, Gen Xer, is familiar with them. Even our kids, that's what they grew up with as well. And obviously with streaming now, I'm sure they're very familiar with all those franchises. So what
Yeah.
a, what a great legacy to have that way. That's incredible. Well, good. Um, One thing we talk about not only is how your journey started. I definitely want to hear that.
Mhm.
When you knew you wanted to be in entertainment.
Yeah.
But we'll talk a little bit about the intersection of faith and media, because that's really one of the main points that we want to talk today, because you have been shaped by your belief, and we want to talk about how that has impacted your career as well. But maybe let's first start, though, with where you started. How did you catch the bug? How did you want to be in entertainment, and what did that look like?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, that catching the bug is that's a very early condition. I mean, that's something that happens in youth, and for me, it was a healthy dose of getting lost in the best way at the movies. Um, my life started before there was such thing as even a VHS tape. So you're going to the theater, you're in the theater, and I had a family that was very much enjoyed getting to the theaters. Um, so I was there a lot. We did have television in those days, though, and that's where you would catch up with some of the older titles. And so between just what I saw in theaters at home, I just became sort of enraptured with. And this is, I'm born in '67, so by the time I'm 8, I'm seeing Jaws in a theater, and by the time I'm 9 and 10, I'm seeing Star Wars, and this is sort of the dawn of a new era in Hollywood filmmaking, but it's also this sort of fantastical kind of film language that captured obviously multiple generations. So I was part of that, but then I agreed to love all kinds of films. By the time I got to college, you're expanding your vocabulary, you're watching the big fun stuff, but you've also discovered international cinema and learning that BYU, which is where I went to school, had uh, as described by experts such as Robert Ebert, probably the best, international program of films between New York and LA. And so that was, you got kind of spoiled, but and then my learning extended into independent film. Right up the road was the Sundance Film Festival, was the preeminent showcase for American independent film and even some international. And I found myself taking tickets there starting in 1990, which was the same year that for me as a student, I decided that I wasn't just interested in film as an artist member, but as a potential pathway, a career path. And so that's when I sort of shifted my major. I was sort of midstream at school, and on the advice of a good friend, I actually went slightly sideways and went to humanities, but within the humanities, emphasized in film. And so it gave me kind of the best of both worlds, a broader, arts, sort of background, as well as just a lot of specific and overlap, specific studies and overlap with the students in film. And then just to bounce right along, I got to the end of, I got my undergraduate degree in that, and I wasn't really thinking much about graduate programs. What I wanted to do, what I did was chase as many professional experiences as I could right here in the area. I was married by the time I graduated, and we were expecting our first, and I was uh, sort of taking any job I could find at the entry level. So I was PAing on educational films, on some church short films, on an IMAX film here. There was a company called Feature Families for Films that was making movies. I worked on a little movie called Rigoletto. I worked on another one called, it wasn't the Buttercream Gang. That was their big title, whatever it was. And so you name it, I was trying to gain my graduate degree in that way and build out a resume and figure out what it is that I thought I could do, what I wanted to do more specifically inside this larger industry. And that culminated after 2 years of me sending a resume out to LA. I had one point of contact who showed me the ropes, or at least discussed it with me, like, uh, the way in the door out in LA was just to, everyone has an assistant. And that's where you start, an assistant to an executive, to a producer, to a writer, whomever. So I was chasing any opportunity. And there's an interesting subchapter that I'll skip by for 3 months, waiting for the first interview that I finally got, which was to be an assistant for a junior executive who was at the Walt Disney Studios. And that, luckily, I landed that one job. And that job I thought was just sort of a foothold for me to learn and to get paid and to figure out how to launch my film as an independent filmmaker, like all the people I'd seen walk into Sundance for the previous 3 years and kind of launch their careers, even though it's a very, very slim percentage of people that do launch their careers that way. But I saw it as a possibility. But meanwhile, what took over was just the job at hand at Disney, and that grew into more opportunities. And so again, just flashing forward very quickly, in 5, 6, 7 years' time, I was a VP of production at Disney Live Action, and finding that that was a different creative avenue into working on scripts, collaborating with directors and producers, and having input on a creative level in terms of the film project you chose and the making of those things, all the way to delivery and marketing. So that that became my career. I just the career found me, and I embraced it because it offered a lot in the way of what I was chasing, I think, in terms of my passion for film, but also just offered the stability and allowed me to raise a family out there. And it was in 2014 that I stepped out of the studio, but not too far. I stepped into a producing deal for the studio. And to me, that was ultimately the real culmination, which was being where I'd always wanted to be, which is sort of day to day on the production. So as an executive, loosely stated, you're working very closely with the production, but much of your job is to manage things back at the ranch. At the studio, you'd pop out, you'd visit sets, but that you'd come back and you'd report, and then you'd work on what the next wave of things were. But as a producer, you are in the weeds in the best way, day to day, moment to moment, on the set, obviously in pre-production, on the set, and in post-production. And part of all the millions of decisions that have to go in to really decide what that movie is going to be or not be. So that's what I've been doing off and on for the last now 12 years. And now I have an independent production company here in Provo. So that's the whole spiel.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I'm going to ask you to double click on just a few things. Mentors. When you think of mentors to you, maybe
Yeah.
it was the junior exec that you had mentioned. I don't know. But are there one or two individuals that really made an impact on you and solidified the fact you wanted to go in this direction? And how did they do that? What did they do? Are there instances you want to share?
Yeah.
Specifics? Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I have a lot of mentors of a fashion. I think I can't point to, in the classical Homerian sense, the true mentor. Honestly, I don't. But in life, I had great mentors and parents. But in we're talking about sort of this career. Um, Back at school, I point to, and again, it's a bit more loose definition, but I had a couple professors, but there was one in the Don Marshall was in the humanities side, and Don, he taught. I forget what his even bread and butter was as far as his classes, but he was the guy who oversaw the international cinema program, and he was also an author and teacher, but his level felt like he kind of showed me in this very practical way what a passion for film might look like inside of academia in a place like BYU, and how sort of broad and varied and interesting that could be. And the other professor that springs to mind was Jim Dark, who's just a legendary film historian, written several books. He's got a cool book on the history of film in Utah, among other things. But he's the one that really just helped me understand the system from the beginning, from the dawn of the birth of cinema into the studio systems into the independent era. And that was fascinating to me. And those things really gave me a strong bedrock. So from that era, I point to those two guys. And then last, I would also put an important footnote in there. My roommate and friend at the time, not a deep friend, not a guy I've spoken to in 15, 20 years, but a guy, Steve Hewish, who's the one who pulled me aside and said, "Why aren't you doing the following? You like become a humanities major, emphasizing film, and why aren't you volunteering up at Sundance Film Festival?" All those things I embraced and became the foundation for my path thereafter. And so just that 10-minute conversation qualifies him as a mentor. Then when I got into LA, um, I did have the benefit of several, influential sort of senior people, and it was never like who I was directly reporting to, but there were people that were senior to me that were doing what I was doing at a junior level, and showed you kind of how to do it well, how to treat others, and in some cases how to not do it. So that's an inverse mentorship. So uh, that I don't, and again, I don't know how this makes me even sound, or it's probably my own fault, but I never had a singular voice. I mean, I wish I did, but I did benefit from a lot of good people around me that I learned a lot from. Um, and but I do look back, just listening to that question and have this kind of slight regret that I didn't have someone that was more sort of um, connected through out all those years. And a lot of people that succeed do have that, and I'll have to interrogate myself why I never did.
Well, I mean, the fact that you came up with that many that quickly though shows,
Yeah,
yeah. And it
a lot of good influences.
yes,
Yeah.
a lot of good influences, so good for you. Another speaking of influence, maybe we'll broach the faith subject. Uh,
Mhm.
how has that helped influence your work day to day? What we talked a little bit earlier, it's hard to extricate the spiritual DNA from the day-to-day work you do.
Yeah.
But yeah, how did it create a foundation, or how has that influenced maybe how you've led others or how you did the day-to-day work?
Certainly, yeah. I think that on the creative side, as soon as my job started to become more creative, when I got into the executive ranks after I'd spent years in the administrative kind of ranks, you find yourself involved in a lot of creative conversations that are about, from the acquisition of an idea to the development of that script to the production of that movie. You're always engaged in a creative dialogue with your writer and your director and another producer or whoever it might be. Um, and all those things, like there's a lot of nuts and bolts when it's like, does this make sense? What are we literally, when it comes to actual plotting and character, but it always goes back to like, what are we even sort of writing towards thematically, what it is about, and how does that, and that becomes the North Star in terms of, whether you go right, left, or otherwise, I think in the story development. And so, and that invariably comes right back to like, what are our values and what are we fighting for? And I found, and I don't think I was unique because of my LDS background. Certainly, I had a value system that was very much informed by that, informed by, your very sort of traditional Christian principles about how we were meant to treat each other and where we place our values, where we place our treasure, right? Here or here. And so that always is filtering through. But I also saw pretty quickly that was, if you, that was inherent in a lot of people around me that didn't necessarily even have the same background, that there's a lot of shared values. And I think that was comforting. And it was rare, if ever. It wasn't a 0%, but it was a small percentage of people, I think, I found just couldn't be off kilter, off base in terms of like, what are you even writing towards? So that's the creative side where you're always something, the stuff that has informed you personally and spiritually is always coming to bear in the creative conversation you're having about the story. Um, and then just on a very practical level, I don't think I would have survived whatever it was, 20 years inside the system, 8 years outside of it in the hallways of that studio without having developed um, a way to work with people that was, being able to be gentle but persuasive and bringing people to some consensus or figuring out why you couldn't and moving around it without, bruising and stepping on people and things like that. That there are people that do manage that way and manage through a little bit of fear and but I never did. And A, it's not my personality, but B, like I learned a lot of that growing up in church studies, on a mission, living in a large, home growing up for my first 18 years with 7 siblings, and how to try to be, if not outright loving, to be at least compassionate in your managerial style or your collaboration style. And so I got to the end of that experience, I think, with most people, if not, maybe not all, but most people, I think, looking back and saying I had a good experience when they were working with me. And that was important, right? It wasn't by accident because you're striving for that kind of outcome. Even if whether you succeed or not, that's a bigger question, or that's sometimes way out of your hands. But how you treat each other is entirely within your hands. And so that was a very important lesson I think I brought into the professional realm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Very well said. Beautiful. Okay, I want to zoom out a little bit and just get your point of view, your opinion on the state of faith in media today, meaning
Yeah.
how it's represented, maybe some of the programming, or and it good and bad, probably, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's both ways. Again, this is totally your opinion. We're not holding you to anything other than your opinion. But would love to hear what you think. What is selling? What is working? What is not working regarding faith in media today?
That's a good question. And there's right now, media, we say in media, it makes it sound like there's a big shop called media and there's a monolithic output of which is just not. So it's a massively fragmented, series of fiefdoms. And so you have even what used to be the big 5 or whatever studios that sort of controlled the majority of film output has been quite diluted and by platforms. And so it really is a really varied and fractured landscape. So I don't think there's any blanket statements you could say, but I do think, I think that just the question, because now we have down the road, we have Angel that is there specifically built to be someone who, in their own words, to amplify light. And so they gravitate towards stuff where there's going to be something that's reaffirming. They're going to focus on characters that have, if not overtly, at least some sort of, I think, faithful structure to their constitution. And then in many cases more overt. I think that you have healthy options in terms of what you want to see reflected in your media intake and what you want to subscribe to streaming wise, what you're going to go to, what you're going to put your money towards in the theater. I think there's always been a battle. I mean, this goes back to the beginning of organized studio filmmaking. There is, well, it has definitely evolved. And there was a time, just going back to the 40s and 50s, where you could be overtly, adapt a scriptural text, Old Testament, New Testament, or otherwise, or even make in 1940, Brigham Young frontiersmen as a direct piece of history. Kind of, again, all the histories in these movies, they're vastly simplified, but it's there to sort of represent religious persecution that also some of the Jewish studio heads were experiencing at the time, which is why it gets green lit. But you could have, I think, a much more direct and uncomplicated appeal to what was, I think, more the majority mindset of a country, which is not the way it is today. And I think that religion has, and I say religion writ large. I'm not talking about our religion. I'm not talking about a specific religion. But I'm talking about the fact that organized religion across the world, especially in North America, I think has created its own challenges because there's a lot of hollowness to the way people often sometimes profess religion. Just as we're told in the scriptures, we see there's a hollow form of that, and there is an honest and sincere form of it. And the sincere form of it is one that doesn't stand on the rooftops and pointing at oneself and crowing about, some kind of superiority. And I think the same, and we've become a much more sophisticated audience in general. And so we don't accept, I think, collectively. Some of us might, and some of us might hunger for something, the simplistic notion of like, here's a person of the cloth or otherwise, and therefore they're a good person. We understand that it takes more than that. And we also understand that even to be a good person is to be imperfect. And so I think we hunger for that kind of honesty, whether it is just stuff that's being touted in the public square or in local sort of leadership or civic leadership or anything, but also as it's represented on film. It's harder to accept. And if it ever feels a little too good to be true, it's because we know that that's not reflective of real life. So this is a very long-winded way of saying that I think now, if it's to resonate, we need to feel the sincerity of the authorship behind it and the voices behind it. And so whether you're living specifically into a religious text, that's a story that's about someone, specifically where it's a key part of the narrative or part of the history of that project, or if it's contemporary, you want to see some honesty in that. And it's not easy. And that's also why I think you have seen there's been a backlash, and why we tend, and it's also become a lazy trope itself to say that, like, if you're going to see a priest or some other facsimile walk onto the screen, you're waiting for them to do the wrong thing, right? And so the pendulum swung, I think, too far on the other way, and whereas the truth often just lies in the middle. And I'd like to see more of that represented, but I think it's there. I think right now you have this sort of not antidote, but this parallel path between Angel and Wonder Project and other like-minded producers of content, and they have access to the audience directly because they have their own platforms. They can get picked up, and I think even people who are only worried about dollars and cents and trying to latch on to projects that they think will do business, they see that's a big business. Um, and so there's simple, I think, so there's parity that's creeping back into the landscape. You're not going to see it nearly as often, if at all, coming from traditional media content companies. My old company, like Disney, Disney's there, and they backstop more optimism in their projects overall, but are also trying to sort of speak to a very large and diverse and global audience. And so it's hard for them to pin themselves down on anything. And then when it comes to other shops, it's really just like, what is the more sort of exciting and titillating idea that we can put through? And they're going to worry less about. They do have to, I think a lot about ethics in their storylines, but not about religion. So this is the most unwieldy and probably unhelpful answer of all. But it really comes back to me for the fact that you can now, in this very varied landscape of media and content consumption, you can find what you want. You can dine, steadily just off an interesting, sort of selection of things, just even the church offers. What I like, and this will come to bear when we talk more about what we're doing now. But I find, again, we talk about specific spirituality as sort of received through entertainment or content like that. I don't find it in stuff that is just sort of a charity, like, because I don't walk out into a world that is full of just rainbows and clouds and smiling neighbors and whatever. I do live in Provo, and I have a lot of actually very friendly and smiling neighbors. But also, once you get to know any one of them, everybody has challenges, struggles, complexity, big problems moving through their lives, whether it's of their own making or not. And that's what I have learned to respond to, is that kind of appeal to an honest portrayal, which is always very complicated, and the struggles. And so, and to me, the essence of drama is conflict. That's the direct quote from my old buddy Jim Dark at BYU. But like, conflict is at the center of anything that's going to be interesting dramatically, and conflict is literally is the heart of the struggle, of the good and the bad. And so to me, there is no inspiration when it comes to, if you're going to be moved by something, and we're not always looking to be moved deeply by content, but oftentimes we can be, but only, I think, if the conflict feels very real and honest and deep, and then you feel like you can connect to that, even if your experience is nothing like it. You can connect to the honesty of that and to the struggle of it, and it moves us. And so we need drama, we need struggle, we need violence, we need to represent all the very real challenges that we experience directly and indirectly in life. And so
Yeah.
I can't think we can shy away from that.
Yeah, I love that. What came to my mind, and I've talked to many people about this, Wake Up Dead Man, right? In the Knives Out series. Uh,
Oh yeah,
if you've seen that, and you probably have.
I have.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
very, I mean, the priest character just being very vulnerable, right? You see a
yeah,
sordid past at times, and you see
yeah.
desire to do well in the future. And I think there was another priest that kind of represents what you said about
Well, yeah.
a
The
hypocrite.
guy who's he's lost his way. And you discover that in a more deep and deep fashion throughout that over here. And then you have a different version of the character over here. And that to me, and it made it a much deeper experience, a richer experience. Like, it's a fun mystery on one level, but it showed a real, and I think very interesting faith battle, that was
Yeah,
unfolding. And that was really, really interesting.
yeah, yeah. Very good, very good. Well, let's do this. I have something called MicroMusings for Mentorship Mike, where I just asked for a quick call and response, 15 to 30-second response to a quick question. So I'll ask you those. Then I want to hear what you're involved with today. And then let's wrap up by I would love for you to fill in any gaps, anything I haven't asked you that you would tell, this rising generation of creators, of makers that you think they should know. Specifically, though, think about the 20 somethings, right? Entering the industry
Yeah.
today. What would you, if you had 3 to 4 pieces of advice, what would that be? So
Hmm.
again, we'll do the quick musings, then you can tell us what you're up to today, and then we can close it out, okay?
Sure.
All right. So, studio tentpole or an indie feature?
As a consumer or as a producer?
As you as a producer, sorry. Yeah.
Currently, indie feature.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
One word that describes your producing style.
Connected.
Connected. Okay. Love it. Okay. Remember the Titans, The Jungle Book, or Christopher Robin? Which one taught you the most and why? You might need a little bit more time than just 30 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll split the answer. I'll say from a technical filmmaking standpoint, Jungle Book was it was a PhD for me because of the complexity of making that movie, which I could attempt to write a book about. But thematically and developmentally, Christopher Robin, just because that was kind of a slow 15-year process unfolding and was something that was a little bit more close to the heart. So
Yeah. Good. Good.
yeah,
Good. Great answer. So which is harder in your estimation, getting a project greenlit or getting it over the finish line?
greenlit,
Okay, just getting the permission to even start, right?
no doubt,
Yeah.
no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Um, one quality you think that every great producer needs.
Um, I think it's a lot of things, but if I'm asked to give you one, I would say it's to. I'm having a hard time isolating it because it always feels like two sides of a single coin, but it's listening closely. I would just start there.
Okay, listening.
And that's the physical, that's the literal act of listening to your collaborators, but also sort of listening to yourself in terms of, because you're there to try to be the rudder on a big ship. And so it's listening to what's happening around you, it's listening to what's happening inside the script, just listening to your collaborators. But that's the easiest singular
Yeah,
answer I might find.
yeah. And that ties into what you said earlier, being connected, right? Bigger ears.
Yeah,
Mouth.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Okay, you might need a little bit more time on this one as well, but was there a moment on set or somewhere else where you said, this is why I do what I do?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that even started before I got into my producer role as a senior executive and just being on a set and the sheer joy of seeing something being physically built and made that is kind of magical and spectacular. And that happens on a day when you are sitting on three massive barges lashed together, just floating off of a tiny little, spit of sand where you've shipped in 100 crew and six cast and just shooting a detente between pirates in the middle of the Caribbean. You're like, it's insane, but it's kind of wondrous. And I've had that's maybe was one of the most notable versions of that, but that happens a lot when you're especially on these larger productions. And but to me, probably more meaningfully is when you're sitting across from a certain talent, an actor or someone that maybe even grew up watching and kind of idolizing one way or another. And then they happen to be working a project that you're working on. And that's very surreal. But nothing beats the feeling of like the movie coming out well, against your own expectation for the movie and watching that with an audience and they're responding the way that not yours, but the way, yes, you're responding the way you hoped an audience would respond. That to me is probably the single, because that's the culmination of it. Everything else is built on hope and struggle. But the movie's made to be presented and to be experienced with others.
Yeah,
So
love that audience reaction and response. I love that. Okay, a fun one I'm going to interject. Give us either I'm thinking of the Pirates franchise, but maybe
sure.
something else. What's one thing most people that might be familiar with the film or franchise not know about something funny that happened behind the scenes, or did you have an experience that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so many things, but we had a very notorious time getting settled about this performance that Johnny Depp gave in Pirates as Jack Sparrow. And so it fell to me, I'll try to keep this brief, but at that level, you're just hiring actors. You're not auditioning people, right? So you're having to kind of guess. And I don't think anyone was too worried about what they thought given the script and given who we thought Johnny was, what maybe everyone thought the performance was going to be. The point of fact, you don't actually know until everyone lines up and you've spent just millions of dollars and you start shooting a movie, and then you watch the dailies, which are the rushes, right? Back then they were actually on film printed and you watch them. And that is, in this case, that's your first time to experience what's actually happening. He was making much bolder choices than anyone ever would have imagined. And because I was the VP, and above me I have a president of production and a chairman of the studio, at this point they had decided to back this movie. It's the most expensive budget they had greenlit in the history of the studio, and as well as just his personal fee for the movie. And I'm the first one watching these dailies and realizing that this, I'm certain, is going to be something that doesn't necessarily jive with what they're expecting to see. And it was, but I had to race because I have a president of production who's on the East Coast at this point doing something else, and a chairman who's over there, and I just had to race to get this DVD in front of them to make sure that they knew what they were getting. Like, if another day goes by and another day goes by, you're just getting deeper and deeper into a process that's very, very expensive to unwind. It's very hard to go back to a location. It's very hard to do everything. So the pressure was very, very high. And there were a few conversations that did happen, but by and large, everyone sort of made their peace and realized they had to let it go. But that was a very, very tense scramble for everyone involved. And I don't know that you know that on the other side of it, because his weirdness in that role became what was very special about,
Yeah.
ultimately, as much as anything about that movie. But it was white knuckles for a lot of people, and it
Yeah.
was really, really tense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That is what made his performance so good. Yeah. Love that. Love that. We never would have known that. Um,
No.
okay, last question I'm gonna ask you for this portion is, Brigham, think about your legacy. In 10, 20, 30 years, when people think of Brigham Taylor, what do you want them to think of specifically with what you're doing in the industry?
Um, yeah, I mean, right now, I'd answer that just by saying, I guess they would, there's two different ways to answer that question. What would I want them to think versus what I would expect them to think? And I feel like that I was lucky enough to work on a handful of big productions. Some of them failed outright, some of them worked really well. But to me, inside of that, if anyone's paying closer attention, our ability, me and a few colleagues around us that were the reason. Like, you're not always the reason something gets made. Sometimes you're there and you're part of the group that's pushing a big rock uphill. Um, Pirates, for better or worse, it wouldn't exist as it does without me and two colleagues, Michael and Josh, conjuring an idea, writing it down, bringing it forward into a staff meeting, convincing our boss, who convinced her boss, and then, of course, all the other creative people that got attached to it, starting with Jerry Bruckheimer and the director Gore Verbinski, all those other people had to do what they had to do, but they don't get anything in their hands if we didn't sell that through with a vision about. And so it's not patting ourselves on the back for that. It's the fact that what we were trying to do in a larger context was, for that studio, is to convince everyone that we could once again do a bigger, broader, appealing four-quadrant action adventure movie that they had not done for 30 years. I would argue, going back to, maybe 1954 and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or something, just didn't have this kind of tonal and audience ambition, because it was there to kind of service parents and kids. Um, and so that, and again, I say for better or worse, because it did open a new era of a kind of filmmaking that Disney had not done. So I was proud of the fact that at least it changed the landscape for what the Disney live action group thought it could do, and as well as it just being a fun, personal sort of triumph to push something through the system there and get it made. So.
Beau Beautiful, yeah. No, that's great. That's great. Okay, we wanna hear what you're doing today. What are some of the projects? Anything you wanna share that way? And then, yeah, let's conclude by what you would, tell to the 20-somethings moving into this industry.
Okay, so in that order, today I'm living this schizophrenic life where we have a a kids show. It's for kids 3 to 6. It's on a YouTube channel currently, and it's an early learner program that centers around these twin girls and their puppet friends that exist in a fairly imaginative little garden playground where they shrink themselves down and they join his puppet friends. So that's the format, and it exists to really tell little stories that revolve around identifying the way a certain character might be feeling, an emotion, and then learning how to kind of deal with that, whether it's a challenging one like nervousness or anger or whatever, but always in the context of a story that unfolds between these friends. And so that was kind of an internal brainchild, not something that we had put our company together to do to make kids programming, but it felt like this sort of opportunity that everyone decided to jump into. We're a year and a half into it, have several episodes up and running. All of us have worn many, many hats on it, and it's become a fun labor that's there to just and overtly just trying to do a simple good, which is to give young kids some tools for emotional resilience and give some pointers to parents who are navigating young kids 3 to 6 through that early life phase. And so, and it struck a chord with a lot of other people here. It has not yet found its footing in YouTube. That will take a minute, I'm sure. But for everyone else that's had exposure to the show that are out there trying to do similar good in the world, like our friends up at the Huntsman Mental Health Foundation and others, they've all sort of signed on or latched on or partnered with us in some way. And so that sort of satisfies a certain kind of craving that I think we have creatively to do something that has kind of a more of a social, consciousness to it. And so that's Lulubug's Garden. Tell your young ones to like and subscribe. Um, and then what we did put ourselves together was to put together an independent film production company to make low budget sort of genre thrillers, which is another form that I dearly love, and a kind of movie that I haven't had much opportunity to work on professionally just because that wasn't the mandate at Walt Disney Studios. And so we are now sort of got one film in the can and several scripts put together and are trying to cobble together a little bit more investment so that we can be more independent to make cool stuff right here. I'm sitting here in Provo. We have a soundstage here. We've got a team here. Um, but to produce things locally, to sort of build out the creative hub that already exists here, between Utah County and Salt Lake County, and um, but also we have, I think, a really fun and accessible idea to be a fully independent studio that can develop, produce, and release in the way that some genre films have done just this year. The bigger ones actually went into traditional routes. Everyone knows the stories about Backrooms and Obsession, and they both availed themselves at one phase or another of a mini major to put them out. But there's another film earlier called Iron Lung that was built on its own awareness because there was a YouTube creator that actually just launched it. And so we already had some captive eyes and ears, but took it to the market himself, took it to screens himself, and was tremendously successful. You can debate the quality of that movie, but what you can't debate is that there is a somewhat novel pathway to being a theatrical release and not just trying to exist and make a cheap sell to a streamer. And that's very exciting to us. So that's the model there that's unfolding with a lot of other fun projects that are embedded inside that larger project of getting these lower budget films made. But that's what gets me really jazzed as a filmmaker, which is to not be beholden to the 20 other people that have to say yes to get something done, which is what you normally have to do.
Yes.
So
I want to interject one last question. Is there a project that Brigham Taylor says, I am not done doing this until I do this project? Is there a bucket list project for you?
no, there's not a thing that I'm clinging to, like I hope I get to do before I die. There's just stuff that I just want to keep doing things, right? And so, there's so loosely speaking, there's a few fun ideas, and I still have some projects at Disney. I've largely fashioned my life to be stepping away from focusing on pushing those very large rocks up the hill for the reason stated. It's just a long, drawn out process that I've done enough of, and it doesn't really get me too excited. We do have a project that I am very passionate about that if, and I'm happy to be working on it because the studio decided that they like it too. And so once they start to sort of clear their own path, I just know I can't, I've lived long enough to know that you can't sort of beat the drums loud enough to change the minds of 6 layers of decision makers over there. But they are leaning into, and so I'm very excited about that. But it does not qualify. It doesn't, as an answer to your question, which is no, there's not, and thank goodness, because otherwise might be a very frustrating situation to be living in.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good to know. All right. Yeah, give us your golden nuggets of wisdom. What would you tell the 20 somethings that are trying to do something that Brigham Taylor did 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah, I'm speaking to, and again, I don't know how broad the constituency is here, so I'll just sort of speak to my path as a someone going into film. Um, but the things I look back on and I feel like were of great value, and so I'd pass along is the process of immersing yourself in as much experience as you can get, especially when you're young. You're talking about 20 somethings. It's like and you can gain that experience. There's no excuse for not getting on a set, on a project somewhere, because you can virtually volunteer your time. And especially if you can, be in a position to be mobile, to get here and there. I was here at the conclusion of my studies. I was here and I worked locally, but I also jumped in my car and I went up to Yosemite to work on an IMAX movie. I went further. And you have to immerse yourself and you have to learn who you really are in the context of real work. It also opens you up to all those very important relationships that will become a network for you, which is vital. And I would also say that you might have a strong sense of what it is you want to do exactly, and you may be right. But when you open yourselves up to as many experiences as you can, you may learn something new about that. Either, and to be very, very open, solicit good feedback in terms of the work you're doing. If you're writing, if you're just working on a set, whatever it is you're doing, try to solicit good feedback and try to be honest and hear it and make the proper adjustment. That may be just to knuckle down and become a better writer, become a better director, or maybe to realize that guess what? You have proven yourself and might have be more adept in editorial department. And that's okay. Like there's a lot of ways I think to find satisfaction creatively and financially in the business. And so again, it comes back to pursuing vigorously and being very open to experiences and opportunities. And I never would have prescribed the path that I wound up having. But because I was open to it, I was able to find success in a way that I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have planned on. Um, and so it's very, very hard if you say that this is my target and 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 I have to hit that, then if you just have to hit a bullet with a bullet, that's a very hard thing to do. So I think you want to expand the pathways to success, especially in this industry. So that would be my overarching advice.
That's great. That's great. Well said. Just hey, this last 45 minutes has been great, Brigham. You are replete with wisdom, and you've done a lot in your life. And sure appreciate you sharing that with this young group that is listening now and that will listen in the future because this will go up on YouTube, so people will see it. Um,
Great.
yeah,
Happy to be here. Yeah.
we really appreciate that. Hey, we may do a sequel if you have more you want to share in the future, but until
Mhm.
then, thank you so much.
I've worked on many sequels. I'm accustomed.
All right,
But yeah, thank
sounds
you.
good. Brigham, thanks so much.
Okay.
We'll see you.
You got it. Bye bye.